Please remain standing for a reading from the Gospel of Luke. On one occasion, when Jesus was going to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. When he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited you both may come and say to you, "Give this person your place." And then, in disgrace, you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, "Friend, move up higher." Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He said also to the one who had invited him, "When you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return, and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. I often hear the argument about the church's relationship to culture, see if this sounds familiar, whether we are getting a little too cozy with the values and attitudes of worldly people and losing our biblical perspective. Now, the way this view tends to go, the Bible offers us clear instructions on how to live and think, and most of the time, these will be more conservative than the liberal culture we are surrounded by every day. Now, aside from the fact that we are also ourselves part of the wider culture we are surrounded by every day, which makes it really hard to determine the us and the them, in this, it seems that we do tend to focus on things we care about in other people's behavior that the Bible backs us up on, and conveniently not so much on those things that are inconvenient about us that the Bible insists that we also should deal with. Like, for instance, our text today, which nails us for the way we reflect the values of the culture. But you don't really hear us say boo about this, because this would fall into the category of things that would loosen us up rather than tighten us down. Jesus, in this passage, gives us new rules for spiritual etiquette that disturb our social relationships. Things like whom we invite to weddings, where we sit at banquets, and how we go about deciding our social calendar. Now that would be an interesting church conversation. Well, right off, we hear Jesus goes to a Pharisee's house for the Sabbath meal. Shabbat Shalom, Jesus. But then Luke slides in this little ditty. Did you hear it? They were watching him closely. Just pause for a moment here. We are a teaching congregation. Timothy, as a pastoral resident, you are now a paid Christian, a religious professional. My counsel to you would be, you are going to be watched closely. It's the nature of the work, okay? Everyone's an expert, Timothy, on how you ought to live, and most of the time you will hear what they think from other people. It is what it is. Get used to it. And my advice to you is to figure out a way to be your most authentic self as a public person. The hardest thing about this is not making the safest choice you can make every time in order to avoid criticism. Can't avoid the criticism. Sometimes it's good for you, whether you like it or not. But also because criticism goes with the job. You see, if all we were meant to be is managers of the status quo, then we could just memorize Miss Manners instead of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So hang in there. It's going to be okay. Jesus got it too, all right? But I digress. Sort of. Back to Luke. He starts with a social occasion, and Jesus then tells a parable that makes it a spiritual occasion. In other words, Jesus is interested in showing us the difference between how we tend to organize our lives that are rooted in our ego needs and how we should organize our lives if we were rooted in the beloved community of the reign of God that is coming. This is the way we should be doing church, not this way, in other words. Well, the parable has two parts. The first dealing with guests at a party, the second dealing with a host. And the first part is hard enough, the second part downright difficult. So let's take the first part first. Jesus notices how the guests at this party all compete for the same chair near the front. That is a place of honor, likely near the host or the most esteemed member of the community who is in attendance. This is natural, it's culturally understandable, and Jesus tells us it may just be harmful to our spiritual health. See, what happens is that we start jockeying for honor as a way to boost our sense of self, our ego, and feel more important. And that means we are giving other human beings too much power over our soul. We are making our proximity to people, our association with the right people, the measure of our worth. And that reflects something about our culture that Jesus is showing a mirror to us about. And if you are old enough to remember the TV show The Jeffersons, you know the theme song, we're moving on up, right? To the east side, to that deluxe apartment in the sky, moving on up to the east side, we finally got a piece of the pie. What do we all think we want but to move up? We always compare ourselves to people who have more. And if we ever associate with those who have less, we pat ourselves on the back because we think it's a big sacrifice we're making, right? We really want the superior seat. Jesus knows if we continue in this way of living, we will not be prepared for the coming reign of God. And he concludes this first part by saying, for all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He does not say maybe, as if some of us are going to get a pass. No, if we try it that way, we will find out that we will not pass. This is a test. Right? But if he had left it right there, then we might be tempted to feign humility in order to gain exaltation, right? That is to say, we might figure if we can just sort of pretend that we're being humble, we can always keep our eye out for that seat that we might get called up to. And that would be just like us, wouldn't it? To game the system with a strategy for our own self-interest. So Jesus goes on to say that we shouldn't even play that payback game. He says that when we give a party, we shouldn't invite those who can repay us in this life. We should keep our eye on the coming reign of God, on the world that is to come, and invite instead those who cannot repay us now, the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't remember the last time I took this part of the Bible literally. Anyone? Yeah, I know. It just seems so natural that we would want to eat with our family and friends and rich neighbors. These are our people. What is Jesus getting at here? I was in San Antonio the last few days. My granddaughter Finley just started the first grade, and so Kim and I and Finley's sisters went to her school to have lunch with her. This is such a fun thing for grandparents to do. Well, she was so excited to tell us about her new friends that she had made, Poppy and Paloma and Hannah, and how she had gotten this great idea that they'd become fast friends so quickly, they needed to form a girls' club. They're the Oak Meadow Mavericks, so they were going to call them the Mavs girls, you know. And this would be a club of girls that were friends, invitation only, don't you know? Well, now, it only took one day for this to fall apart. Because the next day at recess, the girls got together and called a meeting of the girls' club and decided that they would play together on the playground. The problem is some other girls came and wanted to play too. And one of the girls shooed her away and said, no, this is our club. You go find your own friends to play with, which offended Finley's sensibilities. She had a Jesus moment right there. And I think it's because of her family and church that she was raised in, thank God. And so she promptly quit the club that she started the day before and went and played with the excluded girls on the playground. Way to go, Finley. That gets to the heart of what Jesus wants us to see? There are lots of ways that Jesus is calling us to move toward others that gets us into the zip code of Jesus' priorities. One of those ways is just in the normal course of life to observe how we order things, like the difference we have, the inequalities between schools in our own districts. These inequalities are partly a reflection of inequalities generally, but they're also a part of a reflection of the way we've decided we would organize our schools primarily around our neighborhoods. So, Paula Woodbury has decided that she would try to rebalance that a bit. One of our Wilshire members, she went to a meeting of the Lake Highlands PTA presidents recently, and when she was there, she sat next to a kindergarten teacher from the Thurgood Marshall Elementary School in the Richardson District. That teacher described to her her sense of calling in serving high-needs children at a high-needs school and what that entailed. And Paula went home and wrote this on Facebook. I had trouble going to sleep. I woke up early. Her story just didn't sit right with me. These stories never do. This is our community. These are our kids. There shouldn't be such disparity. I can't do everything, but I can certainly try to do something. And then she quickly organized her friends on Facebook, and they had a school supply drive for the Thurgood Marshall School, and in just a matter of days, they had collected hundreds of crayons and pencils and glue sticks and scissors and all those sorts of things to bring to them. It isn't everything, but it is something. And every something is a step closer toward other people, and a step closer toward that beloved community that is the reign of God that is coming, where there is only one neighborhood, folks, and only one zip code. But too often, this is where we end, when it should be where we just begin. See, if we want to get into the one neighborhood itself, we have to go ahead and move there. Maybe literally, but at least figuratively. We have to get into real relationship with the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. That is, with the marginalized and the excluded and the left behind. What Jesus seems to be saying to us is that we have to move from doing for others to being with others. We have to move from charity to solidarity, from kindness to friendship. And then I read about this Oak Cliff parent who wrote an op-ed piece this week in the Dallas Morning News about his family's decision to send their kids to their neighborhood school. In the past, most middle-class families that live in the Bishop Arts District always would request a transfer to the Rosemont Elementary School because it was the least economically diverse school in that part of town. Well, now with the revitalization of that part of the community, that school is overloaded with students and can't accommodate those transfers anymore, which leaves parents either to go to their local school, which is vastly flooded with economically disadvantaged students, or to choose private schools. Here's what Rob Shearer said. I came across research that concluded the one thing schools can do that has made a consistent difference in improving performance, that actually cut the achievement gap in half, was integration. Specifically, income integration. And yet it is rarely discussed or attempted. I realized that the best thing I could do to support the elementary school in my neighborhood is to enroll my kids there. Not everyone thinks this is a good idea. If you think I'm experimenting with my children's future, you and my mother have that in common, he said. But the research I've read in the past year indicates that my children will have success in life regardless of the schools they attend. Both my wife and I are college educated and we are comparatively upwardly mobile, and regrettably, these two factors are the biggest indicators of educational achievement in America today. Well, now, I'm not saying that every parent has to make that same choice as these did. But I am saying that as Christians, we have to be more intentional about putting ourselves in relationship with people who are below us on the social and economic spectrum. Actually, that's not what I'm saying. It's what Jesus is saying. It's right here. And this ends up being good for us too. Instead of insisting on the right to divide, which is all too often the mantra of American Christians these days, we should be practicing the right to unite. Against such, there is no law, right? So when we go on mission trips and when we support gospel efforts through CBF and other ways around the world, have you noticed that we almost always do so by going to some of the poorest and neediest parts of the world? Why do you think we do that? We do it because we have a sense that humbling ourselves and exalting the lowly is not just a key to their salvation. It's a key to ours. And that can start right here at home. Invite someone to church, people, who doesn't fit our demographic. I mean, look around, you know. Invite them to your Sunday school class. And then to lunch. What would happen to them and to you if you did? What would happen to our church? I don't know if we'd grow numerically. I always hope that. but I do know we would grow spiritually. We saw a beautiful example of this commitment to leave no one behind at the Olympic Games in Rio. In one heat of the women's 5,000-meter race, the New Zealand runner Nikki Hamblin fell, and she accidentally tripped the U.S. runner Abby D'Agostino, who also went down. So here is Hamblin lying on the track trying to figure out what has happened when she feels a tug on her shoulder because Abby D'Agostino stopped the race. She got up and she came back. And here's what Hamblin said. Suddenly, I felt this hand on my shoulder, like, get up, we have to finish this. And I was like, yep, you're right. This is the Olympic Games. We have to finish this. I've never met this girl before, and isn't that just so amazing? Such an amazing woman. Regardless of the race and the result on the board, that's a moment you're never, ever going to forget for the rest of your life. That girl shaking my shoulder like, come on, get up. Turns out D'Agostino was injured in the fall, and she couldn't do more than hobble to the finish line. But here's the kicker. The judges decided, whether for sportsmanship or fairness or whatever, to allow both of those girls to compete in the 5,000-meter final anyway, even though they came in at the end. It turns out that D'Agostino couldn't run, and Hamblin wouldn't medal. Oh, but I tell you, they both won. And so did all of us, huh? So did all of us. So maybe that's a parable in itself, with a Jesus ending, huh? You will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Amen.